Hey folks, thanks so much for joining us tonight for our exit poll training here with ALDEF. We're really excited that you're all going to be working with us this primary election. It is such an important moment in time with voting rights under attack at the federal level. We're seeing, a lot of chaos and action happening around detention centers and Delaney Hall here in New Jersey. And so this is a moment where everyone is really fired up about what needs to happen and what changes we want to see made. And so voting is a really powerful way to make sure that your voices are heard and to make sure that the representatives actually are a reflection of you and your values. So it's a really, really crucial moment for us to be doing voting rights work and to making sure that folks in our community have their voices heard and have all their voting rights respected. So if you're new to joining us, I'm Danielle, she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Organizing with AAPI New Jersey. We are a nonprofit organization that champions the rights, representation, and well-being of the state's over 1 million Asian Americans. And we're really excited to be partnering with the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, ALDEF for short, on exit polling. They've been running this campaign for many, many years. We've been partnering with them for the past couple of years to do exit polling in New Jersey. And I'm going to turn it over to Ronik to really dive into this training. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining and taking time out of your must be busy evenings to come and listen to this training. And also thank you for volunteering to take up exit poll shifts this coming Tuesday. So my name is Ronak Patel. I'm the New Jersey Community Impact Fellow with the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, or ALDEF, as Danielle had said. We've been running an exit poll, a national exit poll since I want to say, I think the correct date is 1988, at a time when Asian Americans were often not included in any exit polls, where the readouts from the exit polls were, say, white voters supported this candidate, black voters supported this candidate. Sometimes the Latino candidate supported this candidate, but rarely would there be a line for Asian Americans, let alone for disaggregated Asian Americans, whether they're Chinese, Indian, Bengali, or the many communities that make up Asian American and Asian American and Pacific Islanders today. Um, so I'll dive in. I think what we're going to do as I go through this presentation is touch on a couple the overall purpose of the exit poll, especially as we've kind of refined it in more recent years to be focused on election protection. Then talking a little bit about voters' rights under both New Jersey law and federal law. Then talking about like the logistics of the exit poll, what you'll be doing on your shift. What do you do if a voter reports some sort of incident or needs help? And then what are our forms? And then open up the floor for a Q&A for you all to ask any questions to clarify what I was talking about in the training, or if there's any other more logistical questions about like the practical aspect of Tuesday. So with that, I'll just dive right into the purpose of the exit poll. So the purpose of the exit poll, like I was saying before, was initially primarily focused on ensuring that Asian American representation and Asian American communities' voice was kind of heard in those stories post-election of what are these issues, what issues matter to the Asian American communities. And the idea was to put that in front of stakeholders, in front of lawmakers, to say, hey, this is what our community cares about, and this is what these are the issues that drive our voters. In more recent years, as we've built out the exit poll, it's become clear that the exit poll and exit pollers are really well suited to do traditional election protection work, specifically because they're the ones physically, and you will be, physically at the poll sites, talking to voters after they've gone through the full voting process. So volunteers, including yourselves, will be on the ground in 4 counties on Tuesday. They'll be in Patterson, in Passaic County, at 2 different poll sites, in Bergen County, in Powell Park, and Fort Lee, in Middlesex County, in Edison, at 2 poll sites, as well as Hudson County in Jersey City. So at each of these sites, there's a lot of different things going on, or a lot of different laws that I'll talk to you about in a little bit. But the main purpose is really to talk to voters after they've gone through the voting process and fill out our exit poll form, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. So specifically in this New Jersey primary, we're there to amplify AAPI voices in our community. Like Danielle was saying, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the state now make up around 11% and rising of the state's population. we want to gather information about their preferences. We want to understand if parties are reaching out to them, are candidates reaching out to them? Are they really being heard? And not only are they being not whether they're being heard, but are folks making an active attempt to figure out what needs are most important to our communities? And then the flip side of that is also the election protection work, observing how elections administrators actually administer the election. And so this can be ensuring that they're complying with the law, ensuring that Asian American voters who need language access, and in the case of Bergen County and in Middlesex County, are legally required to get some language access and voter assistance in their native language, like making sure that that is actually occurring in practice. And then finally, when there are unfortunate cases where a voter is being discriminated against or their rights are being violated, ensuring that we have a record of that and we can conduct a voter interview right after it's occurred so that we can figure out the best route forward to getting that voter situation sorted out, but also preventing similar things happening to other voters in the future. And that can be litigation, as I'll talk about a little bit more later, or it can be us contacting the Board of Elections to make sure if there's a problematic poll worker or if there's some other thing that they can do on that day to rectify the issue. So those are, I think, the two big buckets. So I'll talk a little bit more, building on that, about what we use the observations that you collect on election day. So you'll be collecting this survey, which asks voters a variety of things about their experience as a voter and their experience as a constituent. We'll use that information to advocate for our communities in the legislature, at the county level, but also allows us to kind of, as I was saying before, create a record for issues that have occurred to voters in our community so that we can communicate that to local elections administrators at the Board of Elections, with the Superintendent of Elections, with the county clerks. It can be used as evidence in future litigation against those administrators. If we observe a problem, we bring it to them and they don't actually fix it. And then it's also used in advocacy at the state level. As some of you may know, ALDEF and AAPI and J, along with partners from a variety of different communities, have been pushing for a state level Voting Rights Act, as well as reforms at the state level for how elections are administered in order to make it more accessible for our community. So individual stories of voters' experiences that were problematic are really useful in our advocacy to show legislators, hey, these are problems that we've identified. They're reoccurring election after election. You need to fix this. So those are kind of the why of why we do this exit poll every primary and every general election in New Jersey. Feeding into that, we need to know what the actual state and federal laws are that might come up when a voter goes to vote, when a voter registers to vote, and when a voter brings in a sister to help them vote. And that's someone who they trust, and I'll dive into this a little bit more in a second, to help them through the voting rights process or the voting process. There's a lot of different laws, and I won't go into each of these too in deep, but generally speaking, under the federal Constitution, voters cannot be discriminated against on the basis of color or race in the voting process. Now, that can come in a lot of different ways, whether it's gerrymandering, so communities of color don't have a voice at the in their legislature, or it's creating voter impediments and obstacles to voting that disproportionately affect voters of color. There's a variety of ways these can manifest, these type of laws and structures. But there are federal protections. Unfortunately, over the last 10 to 15 years, many of these protections have been systematically chipped away in through the judicial process. More recently, there was a case before the Supreme Court called Louisiana v. Calais that stripped away a lot of the protections voters of color have in gerrymandering cases. But with respect to going to actually vote in an election in New Jersey, the biggest two laws that impact our communities tend to be the ones related to language access. So I think I was mentioning before, in Middlesex County and Bergen County, these are two counties that have a high percentage of folks who are U.S. citizens who are above the age of 18, but don't speak English very well, as according to the Census Bureau. As a result, under Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act, those counties are required to provide language assistance in specific South or Asian languages. In Middlesex County, voters have the right to all of their voting materials in Gujarati, as well as language assistance by someone who speaks Gujarati at the poll site, provided by Middlesex County or the respective poll site. Every voter in New Jersey who doesn't speak English very well has the right to bring a person, someone they know, they trust. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, to come help them vote. That person can walk into the polling site with them, help translate and talk to the poll workers with them, and actually go into the voting booth with the worker, again, with the voter's consent, to actually go through the whole process. So I started talking about this more abstractly in terms of the law, but here is just a rundown of the voters' general rights on election day. They have the right to have the voting instructions in a way that they can actually understand, in a way that they can actually cast an informed ballot. They need a reasonable amount of time to cast their ballot. They can't be rushed through the process. If the polls close and that voter is already in line, as long as they stay in line, they are still able to vote at that poll site. They're entitled to a provisional or affidavit ballot. And so this is a legal term of art. Essentially, it means that they can sign the paperwork that essentially says, I think the poll workers are wrong. I believe I'm registered to vote. I believe I'm at the correct poll site. I would like to vote. What happens to those type of ballots is after they've been filled out and cast, they go to the local board of elections, who then tries to verify that information. And if that voter indeed was correct and was at the right poll site and was registered, that vote will then be counted. A voter also has a right to be free from misdirection. And this seems like common sense, but it's unfortunate to say that oftentimes people are misdirected, either intentionally or unintentionally, to go to the wrong poll site or the wrong ward or wrong election district within a poll site. And they should be free from that under the federal law. They're free. They have the right to be free from intimidating or discriminatory poll workers. And while we hope this doesn't come up, this is something that you want to be on the lookout from when you're talking to someone after they vote. Of were the poll workers welcoming? Were they rude? Were they discriminatory? These are some sorts of questions that, if the answer is yes, it's something that we would want to look into. And then they can bring in, as I was saying before, any necessary language materials with their sister that they want, as long as they want it and it's not being pushed to them. Okay, so I began talking a little bit about Section 203 and Section 208 of the Voting Rights Act a little earlier. Section 203 applies only, as I was saying before, to Bergen County and Middlesex County for Korean and Gujarati, respectively. So at those poll sites, voters who speak those languages should have materials in those two languages. And there should be poll workers or interpreters who can help them in those languages walk through the voting process. With respect to Section 208, that applies everywhere, not just New Jersey, but anywhere in the United States. If a voter brings someone to help them vote, as long as it's not that person doesn't work for their employer or isn't from their union, they can bring them in. That can be a child, a friend, a relative. It's really common, especially amongst families where the family is naturalizing, that people who are either born here or have been citizens for longer help newer naturalized family members go vote for the first time. And so that's something that disproportionately is used by members of our community. So it's something to keep an eye out for if folks are having trouble with. And that's something that you would want to let us know as soon as you observe some issues. Okay. Some of you may have heard about, at the federal level, the SAVE Act that President Trump and members of Congress have been trying to put forth. The SAVE Act has not been passed and hasn't been signed by the president. It's currently not law. What in New Jersey, the guiding law that governs whether or not a voter has to show ID at a poll site is the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA. And so in New Jersey, because again, we also don't have a state requirement for voter ID, the only voter who should be asked for identification is a voter who's voting for the first time in that poll site, or in that jurisdiction. So this is the first time they've registered there. And they didn't provide that information when they registered to vote. So most of you, when you register to vote, there's usually a field on the registration. You put your driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social security number. If they've done that, they likely won't need to show ID at the poll site. So for the vast majority of voters, you really don't need to show ID. If you start hearing on election day that voters have been asked for their identification, that is, again, something you'd want to flag, because, again, that tends to be disproportionately used to scare off communities of color, and specifically communities with large immigrant populations like Asian American communities in New Jersey. The next part here is that for voters, especially members of our community who are older or otherwise disabled, either visually or auditorially impaired, polling sites under the Americans with Disabilities Act must have equipment to enable them to vote independently without the assistance of another person. This hasn't been something that we've seen too much of being an issue in New Jersey so far, but it's always something to keep an eye out, especially for older voters who might not be able to read the ballot in a way that voters with better visual acuity might have. And then additionally, all poll sites in New Jersey should have a voter Bill of Rights posted. And oftentimes you'll see this translated into several languages, but again, only in Middlesex County and in Bergen County for Gujarati and Korean specifically, will that also be in those Asian languages. I'm gonna stop for a second before I continue. Are there any questions? I've been talking for a little while now. Okay, I will keep going then. So I mentioned provisional ballots earlier. Provisional ballots come from a federal law, the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA. As I was saying before, if there's a problem that prevents a voter from voting, whether they're told, hey, you're not registered here, or in the case of New Jersey's primary, you're not a registered Democrat and you want to fill out a Democratic primary ballot, you can't do that. These are things that situations in which if a voter believes that the poll worker is incorrect, they can fill out and ask for a provisional ballot. They cannot be denied a provisional ballot. But I want to be clear here that we really only should be pushing voters to fill out provisional ballots if they believe that the poll worker's information is wrong. Because if you say fill out a provisional ballot in a place that you know you're not registered for, not only is that not true, it just won't get counted because you're not registered there. And the same thing applies if you say you're affiliated with a political party to vote in that political party's primary, but you're actually not, it's not going to be an effective vote. Now, we do see sometimes that poll workers will refuse to give a provisional ballot, mostly because of the reasons I just said, where the poll worker believes they're not wrong, and the voter roll is correct, the party affiliation is correct, or the voter doesn't appear. Or they tell the voter, actually go to another poll site. Those are situations where you want to make sure that the voter knows that this is their right and that they can insist on getting a provisional ballot. That is something we can also call the Board of Elections that day to ensure that voter gets the provisional ballot if that is what they want to do. Okay. So I'm going to jump into exit polling logistics and what the process looks like. Danielle, interrupt me at any point if there's any changes, but the general process should be as follows. You'll be at a poll site. You'll be on one or more shifts that run for about 3 hours. Your poll site supervisor will set up the site. They'll have the written surveys, which will either be in English or in an Asian language. There will be voter issue forms, which again, both of those I'll dive into a little later, and clipboards, which you can clip the form onto to hand to voters who are willing to fill out the survey. We want to make sure that you're talking to voters after they vote, because even though we're outside of the 100-feet zone away from the poll site, we're not really supposed to talk to voters until after they've gone through the process. And also that's where we want to get the information. But we want to know how that process was for that voter. So again, just to emphasize, we want to do it after they've had the chance to actually go cast their ballot. Once they've done that and they've filled out the form, it'll be submitted and sent to ALDEF and to AAPI New Jersey via a Google form. That way we have all the data and can kind of look at, gather that top line information that we want to share with legislatures and for advocacy, as well as the more granular data regarding any issues that an individual voter might have gone through. Okay, so there's two forms, but generally we're going to be working with the form on the left, the voter survey questionnaire. So this is a normal size letter paper that asks voters a series of questions. The first section, voter information, is really just a top line demographic information piece, just to get an idea of what members of our community are voting at which poll sites.
Can I jump in real quick? Since you said the form on the left, I don't see a screen share. Do you have a deck up?
Oh my God.
It didn't occur to me until you were like, oh, on the left side. I was like, okay, I should be seeing something. I'm so sorry. I was like, maybe Ronix just like winging it today. Okay, and now you're muted, but I do see the screen.
Okay, well, to everybody on this Zoom and to those reviewing this through the recording, I'm sorry. The deck will also be distributed so you can follow along while I talk. But, oh shoot, okay. Let me just step back then, actually. So just so it's actually in front of folks for just the logistics part. You'll be at a poll site, you'll have these forms, which are the actual exit poll. And then you have another set of forms, that's the voter issue form. Most of the time you'll be working with the exit poll. That's what we're actually sharing with voters and we're trying to get them to fill it out. The ones on the left is that form. The first questions are the ones I was talking about that ask basic questions about the individual voter. That gives us an idea of which voters are voting from our communities are voting at which poll sites. It also gives us information about whether this is their first time voting, which can help us flag HAVA issues, like I was saying before. And with respect to their party affiliation, that also is important to us, especially in primary elections, to see if Asian Americans are having what level of impact they're having on the respective primaries in each of their electoral districts. The second piece, the voting experience piece, is very important for the things I was mentioning earlier with regard to flagging issues that might be either discrimination or a form of or a violation of someone individual voters' rights. So the general question is, was it easy for you to vote at this poll site? Most voters hopefully will say very easy or easy. But some folks will say it's very difficult or that I was not able to vote today. Those are big flags that something went wrong in the process. And you as the volunteer should talk to them about what happened that made them feel like it was either very difficult or that caused them not to be able to vote that day. Those are situations where you would look at the voter issue report form, kind of check, which allows you to kind of have a set of issues that could be one of the issues that they faced. But also it might not be. So it's important to talk to them to kind of figure out what actually went wrong in their process that made them feel that way. The next 4 questions, 2 through 5, are just also flag questions of, did they ask you for ID? Were you prevented from having someone help you vote? Were they rude to you? Were they discriminatory? Again, if they're answering yes, that they were required, an ID was requested of them, or that they were prevented from having someone help them, or there was a rude or hostile or discriminatory voter or poll worker, that again is a flag for you to have a longer conversation with them as to what happened. Oftentimes voters, especially with voters with names that might not be familiar to English speakers, will voluntarily provide their identification because it has their name and it's easy they feel it's easier for the poll worker to find them in the voter roll. So that's why this question number 3 is also just a flag for us that they provided it voluntarily versus being demanded or requested of them. The third section, language access, is really focused on what the accessibility was for voters who aren't fluent in English to the level where they can navigate the voting process only in English. Specifically in Middlesex and Bergen County, this is required in Gujarati and Korean respectively. But there's also clearly, as many of you know, a need for this type of language access in many other communities, and even in those communities for different languages. So it's important for us to see that if folks are having problems navigating the poll sites, it's related to these missing language access pieces that are not available in other parts of the state or for different languages in Middlesex and in Bergen counties. And then finally is the issues section. One question asks, what are the three most important things that influence folks in their vote today in the primary election? And then two asks if anyone has contacted them to vote, encouraging them to vote in this election. These questions are important for different reasons. The first being really about what's driving our community and what do our communities care about. And the second is really focusing on the fact that Asian Americans are often neglected by political parties and by organizations that are meant to mobilize voters. And so this enables us to kind of see where that gap really is in the state, where county-wise, or if it's something that's common at all of these poll sites and all of these disparate communities within New Jersey. Okay.
The voter. We have
a
ahead. Question in the chat box asking if we fill this out or if they fill them out themselves, or do we ask them verbally?
Yes. Sorry about that. That's a great question. The voter survey questions will have clipboards, and you can hand it to a voter if they're willing to fill it out. So for most voters, they'll fill it out themselves. Sometimes some voters want help either walking through the survey, or they'll ask you to help them fill it out. Especially with voters who might be limited English proficient, or might be older and not wanting to make a mistake or not being able to read the survey well, you might want to also read out the survey to them if they ask for that level of help. I think one other thing to flag is folks who have language skills among you who either speak one of the languages that voters in your community speak. It's often good to greet them in that language and to speak to them in that specific language, which I think makes them feel more comfortable and willing to fill out the survey, but also makes them more comfortable to tell us issues that have affected them either in the voting process or before the voting process that day. So I hope that answers that question. Turning to the voter issue report form. So we have traditionally used this to help volunteers document voter issues when they come up on election day. But we are generally moving away from using this form as like the main thing that we want volunteers to do when a voter brings an issue to them. What we want you all to do, and I'll put my phone number in the chat, but on election day, if anything goes wrong, or if there is, if there's any voter issue and any voter is complaining either about a poll worker or some other issue that's impacted them, whether it's the ones listed or otherwise, the first thing you should do is actually reach out to us at ALDEF. And I'll put my number in the chat if I can at the end of this presentation, because I don't know where chat has gone. Today is really great for my tech skills. And then you'll be able to, I'll sit down and talk with you over the phone, but to kind of triage what to do with the specific issue. What we want to make sure is that you get the voter's information, so that if the voter needs to leave, and oftentimes people have to go to work, they have other commitments, they can't just stay there, we can follow up with them and get more information so that we can advocate for them in future elections, but also to make sure, as I was saying before, that other voters don't encounter the same problem this election. So I started talking about this before. You're volunteering, you are at the poll site, you see voters coming out of the poll site, as I was saying, be friendly, be welcoming. Ideally, if you recognize that someone a voter who's coming out might speak the same language as you, greet them in that language. If they ask, what's the point of the survey? The succinct answer is it makes sure that our community's needs are being met and that elected officials are paying attention to us. The longer answer is all the stuff I was saying before. The voters will then actually go and complete the form. If they need help filling it out or understanding any questions, feel free to offer that help. They don't have to answer any question they don't want to answer. Many voters feel uncomfortable answering questions about their party affiliation or who they voted for. Luckily, right now, we're just asking about party affiliation. So sometimes, especially in primary elections, they're much more willing to do that. But that is something that does come up year after year. If they only answer some questions, that's still great. That's still information that can be helpful for our advocacy in the future. The other thing is just to make sure when they hand you back the filled out form, that when they made markings, it's actually clear what they meant to mark. Usually that's just not a huge problem, but it's something just to double check that someone didn't take the time to fill something out, but that we can't actually ultimately use that information. So now the voter has filled out the form and they've handed back to you the filled out and completed form. That's the time when you'll write down the poll site and the time that it was filled out. This is extremely important, specifically the time, because it enables us to know when issues came up in the future. And if something were to turn into litigation or something more severe where that type of evidence was useful, it's good to us to know contemporaneously the time was documented. Poll site, your poll site, you can either write it now once the thing is completed. I've seen poll site supervisors just fill out a bunch of forms and put the poll site so that they're especially at busy times like 5 o'clock after work and that rush, volunteers aren't like scrambling to fill that out, but the time is something you want to fill out contemporaneously when you get a filled out form back. Once you have that filled out form back, your poll site supervisor will be in charge of managing how that gets submitted via the Google form that Danielle will share with you. That's where the data needs to go ultimately. The form is the first step in us collating all the data from all 7 sites in all 4 counties. Okay, so I mentioned a couple of different voter issues that come up. Here are just some that we've seen over the years that have come up across the country that we would want you to keep your eyes on, eyes out for, that a voter might talk about when you talk to them after they've gone through the voting process. What I mentioned earlier was that they were required to show identification or prove their citizenship. This is unfortunately becoming a big news story now at the federal level, as I was saying before, with the president and members of Congress pushing for national voter ID and raising a lot of unfounded, I don't know what the right word is, but unfounded rhetoric about non-citizens voting in US elections, which is, again, statistically not a huge thing, not an extremely uncommon form of crime and not a form of voter fraud that's not really prevalent in our communities. Yet it still happens, and it disproportionately happens to Asian Americans, partially because of the perpetual foreigner concept, and partially because sometimes poll workers are just not trained well, and they think that that is a part of the voting process. We've seen rude and hostile poll workers in New Jersey and elsewhere in recent elections, and it happens. So that's something to also keep an eye out for. In Middlesex and Bergen County, luckily we haven't seen this too much, but it still happens where they're missing bilingual materials, including the ballots, or the poll site does not have signage that allows folks who are Korean speakers in Bergen County or Gujarati speakers in Middlesex County to actually navigate and find where the poll site is and actually navigate the voting process within the poll site. The same thing with oral assistants in those 2 counties. There's no one at the poll site who actually speaks those languages. And that's something that is federally required for those counties to provide. There are situations, I talked a little bit about provisional ballots, voters being denied ones when they have asked for them or are being forced to use them. Provisional ballots are kind of your plan Z when voting. You don't want to vote on a provisional ballot. You ideally want to vote through the normal voting process. So if you're being pushed to vote provisionally, that is also a giant red flag for us that something is going wrong, and that voter is being denied the normal process that other voters get to use or should be using. There's a very common issue, especially in primary elections, that's not listed, but is similar, is a voter's party affiliation either has been changed or they are registered as an independent or registered with a party that they did not previously register with. And this is a huge problem in New Jersey, which has closed primaries, which will effectively deny that voter the right to vote in their chosen party's primary. We really want to keep an eye on this, especially because it effectively would result in the voter being denied the right to vote. Um, there's always there's always can be issues where poll workers are confused or they're undertrained. That's something also we want voters to communicate to us and for us to communicate to the boards of elections to ensure that their training is sufficient. And then also voter redirects to other poll sites. This is common when poll sites change and rewarding happens, and folks are who have been voting at one poll site for many years. That poll site either closed or they've been rewarded out of it, and they have to go to other poll sites. This is something we want to keep an eye out, especially because it's the board of elections. Sorry, it's the elections administrator's responsibilities to tell voters, "Hey, your poll site moved. This is where it is." For all future elections. So those are some common voter issues. There are obviously other ones that might come up, but these are the ones that we've seen for the most part in New Jersey and elsewhere in the country. Okay, so I'll talk briefly about the voter issue report form. This form is generally designed to help you document their voters' information. So like I was saying, allows us to follow up with them. But also kind of flagging what type of issue this is. So we can also kind of triage what type of action we need to take. Is this something we need to call the Board of Elections about today? Is this something that is a systemic problem where several voters are complaining about the same issues? You're going to want to contact me as soon as the voter has informed you of one of these issues, so I can help you both fill out the form and work through this process to figure out what we should do to help that voter and to prevent other voters from going through the same thing. We want to make sure that you write down either on this form or somewhere as much details of whatever happened onto some sort of paper, ideally this form. But as long as it's documented, that's the real purpose here. You want to document the voters' information, but also anyone else who was involved, whether, for example, if they were denied the ability to bring in the sister in with them to help them vote, that person's information. If there was a specific poll worker or other voter who was being discriminatory or rude or harmful towards them, that person's description, whether for a poll worker, if they have a name tag or something, their name, any information that could eventually be useful to identifying the individuals involved and helping us advocate for that voter are things you'd want to write down here and communicate to me. I thought I might have heard someone come off mute. Is there a question? Okay, no worries. So finally, some FAQs. When your poll site supervisor, when they first arrive at the poll site, will go into the poll site and let the individuals running the poll site know that we'll be outside of the poll site conducting the exit poll. They'll provide them with an authorization letter, which ALDEF is working on getting from each of the boards of elections in the 4 counties you all will be exit polling in. If there are any issues where a poll worker or their supervisor is not allowing us to exit poll, please contact me at ALDEF. I'll again provide my phone number at the end of this so that we can contact the Board of Elections to ensure that we are able to exit poll at that poll site. What if poll workers are hostile? This sometimes happens. Again, like I was saying before, just take notes of what they said, who said it, so that we can, again, go to the Board of Elections and say, hey, these poll workers are doing these things that are either illegal or just harmful, and advocate for both you, the volunteers, but also voters who are going to have to go vote at a poll site with a poll worker who is clearly hostile. Oftentimes we get a question from a lot of voters when we approach them asking, how long does it take to fill this out? As some of you who are repeat volunteers, the older survey used to be quite long and used to be on like a legal size piece of paper and used to take maybe 5 or 6 minutes to fill out. This simpler, shorter form, maybe at best 2 to 3 minutes. If the voter obviously needs either assistance reading the form or needs help understanding it, obviously that can take longer. But if a voter asks, hey, how long does this take? I'm in a rush. 2 to 3 minutes seems to be a pretty accurate estimate. Should you report long lines to ALDEF? Yes, pretty much any problem. The go-to answer should be to call me at ALDEF. We want to make sure that those long lines aren't a systemic problem or a racialized or otherwise discriminatory problem. If there's an issue, for example, where poll sites that are in predominantly AAPI parts of the town or city have very, very long lines, but parts of town that have a majority white population has short lines, that's something we can both do advocacy about and look into if there's actually a legal violation as well. And when should you take breaks? Whenever you need to. This is something you can talk to your poll site supervisor about. It's a long day, and depending on the weather, it might be a warm day or a rainy day. So take care of yourselves, and if you need to take a break, take a break. And that's all I have for this longer presentation on exit polling. Again, I apologize for not having the slides up for the first half of the presentation. They'll be shared out as well. And thank you again all for volunteering to help us out with this important work.
Great. Thank you so much, Ronik, for this presentation. I will add just on the tail end, you mentioned like taking a break. We definitely want to make sure that folks are comfortable. We'll have snacks with us. We will be ordering lunch for the lunch shift, dinner for the evening shift to make sure that people are fed. Most of our sites will have tents, so it looks like it's not going to rain, but it might be sunny, so there will be some protection. We can only travel with a limited number of chairs. So if you are so inclined and want to bring your own chair, we've had volunteers in the past who bring their own like lawn chairs with them. So totally welcome to do that. And then most of the sites are pretty nice about letting us use the restrooms inside. I think we might be at like one or two new sites this year, but every other site that we've been at, they're usually pretty nice about just letting us come in to use the facilities or taking a break indoors. So we definitely want to make sure that folks are prioritizing their wellness as well. So you're on your feet for a long time, you're outside in the elements. And we just want to add one other element to this. Last election cycle in the fall, there were some rumors about having the Department of Justice sending people out to inspect some sites. That is one of the reasons why we've added some of our exit polling locations in Passaic County and Patterson. And so we just want folks to be aware of what to do if you do encounter any federal enforcement officers. Just a general know your rights information just for everyone to have is that they will like agents do need a judicial warrant in order to like get any things from you. So like please do not like comply with any of the things that they're saying off the bat. Like if ICE or police officers were to come, you could say things like, am I being detained? Am I free to go? Which again, that's more of like the know your rights rule rather than you're doing exit polling. But these rights are applicable in both of those situations. I think some of our sites will have little cards that just have instructions on what to do if you have interactions with law enforcement. Most of those cards are out in the field right now, so we'll see what we get back in time to put in our bags. But generally, like, if you do witness any incidents that are sort of outside the realm of general voting incidents where you would contact Ronik, you would instead reach out to someone on the API New Jersey team, and we'll share that information as well. And so each of the sites, as Ronik mentioned, will have a captain. Most of the times, there will be a staff member who will be captaining that site. So that's the person that would be liaising with both the poll workers inside, but then also any law enforcement or federal agents if they were to be there. So that would be on the API New Jersey team to handle those situations. And Shire, am I missing anything about? I feel like that was like the worst KYR I've ever done. Am I missing any like top line things that we should make sure folks are aware of?
No, I think that those are all good.
Great, thanks. And again, as I mentioned, like your wellness and your safety are the priorities too. So when you are interacting with these folks, you want to be thinking about like your risk level, your privilege level, and have that also inform how you're responding in one of these situations. All right. Do we have any questions from folks that are on the call with us? No, it is a really fun experience to do exit polling. You get to talk to a lot of new people, meet some new friends who are exit polling with you. It's always really exciting, and I feel like I'm always learning something new from just like hanging out with people doing this work. So it's a really great experience. We're really excited that all of you are joining us for this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or to our general vote. That's VOTE at AAPI email address, and we'll make sure that we get all of your questions answered ahead of time. Great. Thanks y'all so much.